Chazak ve'amatz. Be strong and courageous. I'm Mirala Goldsmith, co-founder of Jewish Earth Alliance. The next 100 days have the potential to be a breakthrough moment for action on climate change. When we started planning this event, we knew that it would be an uphill climb, and we needed to prepare ourselves. But we had no idea that we would be meeting a few days after the horrific attack on our democracy that took place last week, and during a vote in the House on supporting the invoking of the 25th Amendment. I'm so grateful that we are here tonight. As you sit at home in front of your computer, take a moment now to feel the presence of so many others who share your passion and commitment. Together, we can do this. Please go to the chat box now to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. Phil Arignano will be hosting the chat and can answer any questions that you may have. We'll be closing the chat during the panel discussion. And then when it's time for your questions, I'll let you know that it's time to put them in the chat box. Before we move on, I just want to thank all the sponsoring and co-sponsoring organizations that helped to put this program together, and especially the wonderful colleagues who worked with me to develop this program. So let's get started. Rabbi Beth Cardin is a leading teacher and activist in the faith and environment movement. Just last year, she co-authored the conservative movement's Teshuvah, or Jewish legal opinion, on the Jewish imperative for sustainable practices, which was unanimously adopted by the conservative movement's Committee on Jewish Law and Standards. Now she's the co-founder of the Maryland Campaign for Environmental Human Rights, devoted to creating a state constitutional amendment that will codify the right to a healthy environment. Rabbi Beth Cardin.
Thank you, Mirala, and thank to all the co-sponsors of this. I am glad to be here. And as you said, these are auspicious times, and it is good to be together to gain strength from one another. I want to share a Hebrew phrase that's the foundation for all that we'll be talking about tonight. A phrase that speaks to the sacredness of the work we dedicate ourselves to, yet a phrase that very few of us have heard of. And that phrase is Yishuvo Shel Olam. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to, for those of us who are visual learners, see if I can put that in the chat. Oh, can I get it to everybody? There we go. Yishuvo Shel Olam. Judaism teaches that there are two interrelated ethical rubrics that guide our living rightly on this earth. One is tikkun olam, repairing the world, the call for us to be in right relationship with one another, the call to pursue social justice and equity and prosperity for all. Most of us know this phrase. It's been a calling that has inspired American Jewry for decades. The other rubric is Yishuvo Shel Olam. It means establishing the world, creating a habitable world, making the world a place where life can thrive. Yishuvo Shel Olam is a call for us to be in right relationship with the earth. It refers to the fact that we are God's partners in carrying forward a stable, fertile, and regenerative world, like the one formed of creation. It teaches that it's up to us to protect and care for a world in which life of all kinds can recreate themselves day after day, year after year, as they did for all the generations before us, and as they were designed to do for all those who come after us. So as Tikkun Olam is the call to be in right relationship with each other, Yishuvo Shel Olam is the call to be in right relationship with the earth. And the two, of course, are essentially integrated. As Liberty Hyde Bailey wrote over 100 years ago, one does not act rightly towards one's fellows if one does not know how to act rightly toward the earth. And this concept of Yishuvo Shel Olam is not new. It comes from the prophets. Isaiah wrote, "The earth was not created for chaos. It was formed lashevet, for living, for life. Rashi, the great 11th century commentator on the Bible, explains that lashevet here means lihiot asukim b'yishuvo shel olam, that we are called to be engaged in yishuvo shel olam, that our task is to ensure the ongoing establishment of the world so that we might take the awesomeness of God's creation and build from it a vibrant society and leave an even better world for those who come after us. And that's why we're here tonight. From Isaiah to the rabbis, to us, our task is Yishuvo Shel Olam. You knew this even if you didn't know the words. And that's why you're here. And that's why we're committing ourselves to working on these issues with Congress. And that's why we're eager to learn about how we can get engaged in legislative initiatives. And that's why we're eager to learn from our other presenters tonight. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce my fellow panelists. I have the honor of introducing Rebecca Leber. Ms. Leber is a reporter for Mother Jones in their Washington, D.C. bureau, focusing on climate and environmental issues. Previously, she was an editor for Grist, personally one of my favorite environmental news sites, and a staff writer for the New Republic. She has won several awards, including a 2017 Seal Award in environmental journalism. And I'm delighted to turn the stage over now to Dadla Panazil of Temple Soleil, which serves the North County coastal community of San Diego, to introduce his own member of Congress, Representative Mike Levin.
Oh, good, it worked. Can you guys hear me? Oh, good, because my internet just froze and I became Judy's husband for a second. I'm Dadla, and Judy and I have been working on climate solutions and clean energy for the last 10 years with Citizens Climate Lobby and more recently with the Jewish Earth Alliance. During those years, we've had the opportunity with many members of Congress, and Mike Levin's office, Mike Levin and his staff have been a breath of fresh air for us. He totally gets it. He knows it's real, it's urgent. He knows we've caused it and we can fix it. There are solutions. Recognizing that and his talent and background, Speaker Pelosi and House leadership appointed him to the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis during his first term, right out of the gate. So it is with much gratitude, and I'm honored to introduce our Representative Mike Levin.
Well, thank you so much, Dadla and Judy. Incredibly kind introduction. Grateful that you're here. Good to see our other friends from Temple Soleil. As I saw the people in the chat, I saw at least a couple others from Temple Soleil. I miss you all. I hope that we're all able to get together soon. And I hope that everyone out there is staying safe. I want to thank Rabbi Cardin for those inspiring words. I want to thank Mirala and everybody who made this event possible at the Jewish Earth Alliance and all the other organizations that are involved. I know the event is titled Climate in the Capitol, and I can tell you that the climate in the Capitol has changed quite a bit over the last week. I am in the Capitol complex right now for the first time. I just flew in for the first time since the tragic events of last Wednesday. And the first thing that I want to just briefly say is want to offer my condolences to the family and the loved ones of the Capitol police officer who was tragically killed during the attack here at the Capitol, as well as the family and loved ones of the Capitol police officer who took his own life in the wake of the event, and then the family and loved ones of the others who passed away here as well. You may know what we're doing right now in Washington, D.C. If you haven't turned on any other channel, we are tonight voting on the 25th Amendment, sending the Vice President a resolution stating that he must invoke the 25th Amendment to remove President Trump from office because of the clear and present danger that he is posing to the nation right now, inciting an insurrection in the Capitol against a co-equal branch of government, something I never thought I would see. And then, assuming he does nothing, that Vice President Trump does not take, or Vice President Pence does not take action on the 25th Amendment, tomorrow we're going to be voting to impeach President Trump for the second time. It's not something that I take lightly. It's not something that my colleagues take lightly. I can tell you it's not what we wanted to be doing right now. Many of my Republican friends and colleagues are talking about healing and uniting. And I would just offer that we can't have healing and unity unless we have accountability. And unless the people that were responsible for fomenting this terrorist attack, this insurrection on our most important citadel to democracy that I get to work in each and every day, truly an incredible honor to get to work in this historic complex. If we don't hold them to account, if we don't make a firm and strong stand for democracy, then I don't think that oath that we took just a couple weeks ago was worth much. On the other hand, I hope that I'm actually encouraged by some of the statements that I'm seeing, and you're probably seeing them too in real time, with some Republicans finally standing up to this president in the wake of this awful, awful attack on the Capitol. Now, I think it's important to very briefly just frame where we are in terms of climate legislation. You may have noticed that on Wednesday, we had this unbelievable tragedy, this unprecedented attack. But just a few hours before, we were in a celebratory mood because we had just won these two consequential Senate races in Georgia, with Reverend Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff becoming the new senators-elect from the great state of Georgia. With that, of course, it gave us a 50-seat majority in the United States Senate, with Vice President-elect, soon-to-be Vice President Kamala Harris, casting the tie-breaking vote. What that means is that through a process known as budget reconciliation, with a simple majority, we're going to be able to get a significant number of things accomplished. Obviously, there's a direct impact on things like confirmation of Vice President Biden's cabinet, soon-to-be President Biden's cabinet, the ability to move forward with judicial nominations, but also on big items, including climate, including infrastructure, including healthcare, and many other items. We're going to be able to move forward on that budget reconciliation process. So what we are in the process of doing, and Dadla and others know this, is in the last Congress, we came together as a select committee on the climate crisis to create a roadmap, an action plan. And if you go to climatecrisis.house.gov, and I think Jonathan Gilbert is on here, my wonderful staffer from our office here in DC. Any of you interested in this, Jonathan can share more details, but I see the link there in the chat, so thank you very much. You will see that it is an over 500-page report that has literally, boy, maybe 200 pieces of legislation in it, something like that. Just a ton of bills in the report, many of which were introduced previously, others of which are to be introduced in the new Congress. But it's that foundation, it's that roadmap. And the way things work in Congress is you've got a lot of different people with pieces of the climate crisis because of how broad of an issue it really is. You've got, for example, the committees that are involved, everything from transportation and infrastructure to energy and commerce to science, space and technology, natural resources. Pretty much every committee in Congress is involved, even Ways and Means with the tax credits and so forth that we need to get a lot of these projects off the ground, the Appropriations Committee, you name it. And that committee, every committee has some tangential or direct relationship to the climate crisis. So what we try to do as a select committee is pull all the resources together, and we did that. We published what was called one of the most comprehensive and one of the most well thought out reports as far as United States climate policy, with that goal of net zero emissions by 2050, zero emission transportation far sooner than that. And I encourage you to check out all the details of that report. Now, here we are in the 117th Congress. We have kept our House Democratic majority, albeit it's a little narrower than it was before, but nonetheless, we still have the gavel. We still have the opportunity to create select committees, to chair those committees. And so the speaker reconstituted the select committee for the climate crisis with the specific objective of now implementing many of the recommendations, many of the pieces of legislation that we put in our climate report last Congress. What we're going to be doing is coming together and prioritizing and talking about what can we get done with 50 votes, what can we get done via budget reconciliation. On the other hand, what can we get done or what will require 60 votes and the potential elimination of the filibuster or getting 10 Republican senators on board. And once we've got that list, we're going to go after it. I can tell you that work is being done, has already been done, and continues. And we're going to go bold and we're going to go big. And I can tell you this, I know that the Biden-Harris administration is completely committed to the proposition that clean energy and the clean jobs, green jobs, the solar and wind and vehicle electrification and our resiliency of our electricity grid and the incorporation of a whole lot more utility scale battery storage and dramatic rethinking of how we generate electricity, regenerative and sustainable agriculture, goods movement, mass transit, all these things are on top of mind of the Biden-Harris administration. And I know we're going to go big and bold. And if you want a sneak preview, and I'll close with this because I want to leave plenty of time for discussion and questions, I would take a look at our Moving Forward bill from last Congress, HR 2, the Moving Forward Act, a bold $1.5 trillion infrastructure bill that we passed in the last Congress. Now that we have the Senate majority, now that we have the Biden-Harris administration, I think there's an outstanding chance that you're going to see much of that become the law of the land. That'll mean a dramatic scaling of vehicle electrification. That'll mean dramatically reducing our carbon emissions via transportation and a whole lot else. And also what we have to do during this time of COVID, when we've got this unparalleled public health crisis, but also the economic crisis that has also developed as a result of the public health crisis, we need to put billions of Americans back to work in the jobs of the future that are high-skilled, high-wage jobs. We've got to regain our global economic competitiveness. And we can do it with clean infrastructure, with the green jobs, building back better, as the Biden-Harris administration has said ad nauseum. That's what we're going to do. We're going to need your help. We're going to need the help of all the organizations out there, all the grassroots support, all the good folks at Citizens Climate Lobby and everywhere else to make sure that we get this done in the next 2 years. So we're going to do it. We're going to do it because we won those seats in Georgia and because we've got the House Democratic majority and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Thanks for having me, everybody. Stay safe out there.
Thank you so much, Representative Levin. You're giving us a lot of hope for the future. I want to bring our other panelists into the discussion and hopefully get into some of the nuts and bolts and some of the challenges that we're going to be facing. So we have Rebecca Leber here, who's been covering climate and Congress. And I wanted to bring her in, and she wrote back in, I should say you, now that we have you on the screen, Ms. Leber, back in 2015, you wrote that Pope Francis's encyclical would not break the stalemate on climate change. As faith activists, of course, we were very encouraged by Pope Francis's encyclical. You wrote that his words aren't powerful enough to dislodge politicians from their fossil fuel backers. Not the politician we have here tonight, but there are a lot of politicians we know that are in the pocket of fossil fuel backers. So we're here tonight to talk about what we can do as Jews, as people of faith, and as citizens to dislodge Congress. So I'd like to bring you in, and maybe perhaps you can comment on some of what the representative has said, and from your experience, what can we do?
Right. It's interesting you bring up this story I wrote in 2015. That was such a different world than we're living in now. And I think the context of what was happening then is really important, and how things have changed. Because in 2015, I think a lot of people, the press included, and perhaps some lawmakers, were still under the impression that maybe they could convince climate deniers to come along. that that the powerful words of Pope Francis, for example, could convince people who otherwise thought climate change was a hoax that this was a priority and this was the crisis of a generation. I think we know now that it didn't work. I think his encyclical and the work, of course, of the interfaith community has done a lot to inspire people to take greater action. But there is this minority in the country that will never think this is a real crisis, just like we have a minority in this country that doesn't think coronavirus is deserves the drastic actions we've seen. So I think what's happened then is a lot of people have woken up, one, that this is a crisis, that we need to reduce our emissions drastically over the next coming decades. But also, I think the Democratic Party and the congressman spoke to this, have come a long way to both prioritize this issue and also realize that they can't wait for Republicans to suddenly get their act together on climate, that waiting for some bipartisan breakthrough won't be enough. And that's where you see things like the select committee that is finding ways to move policy forward. In some cases, it with Republicans, that there might be some room for bipartisan compromise, but it's not something Democrats are counting on. And as far as what I think people can do, it's coming at a really interesting moment because we're seeing just how broken parts of our political system are with the violence the last week. So I think when it comes to climate action, what's really important, one thing that has made a huge difference is pressuring Congress, pressuring lawmakers to not just think climate change and speak out on climate change being a concern, but to prioritize it. I think that has made a huge difference for the Democratic Party. We saw in the 2020 election that climate went from something perhaps on a long list of concerns for Democratic leaders to one of the top concerns, to something that deserves a select committee, that deserves to be moved forward on in the first 100 days of the Biden administration. So I think groups that are mobilizing to pressure Congress to prioritize climate, that goes a long way. But I also want people not to forget that state and local action matters a lot too, and getting involved in your community to look at what states are doing on climate, what cities are doing, because the federal level has actually been looking to states as a model and an example. So when we see dozens of states and cities around the country pledge to go 100% renewable energy, that becomes both a case for Congress taking greater action and also a model for how to do it. So I think it's important not to forget that piece of things as well. And finally, I think what's important is in engaging people, and this can feel a little trite of how to, I guess, engage your neighbors, engage your friends on an issue like climate. But I think we see now more than ever, unfortunately, trust in our institutions are at historic lows, and that includes, as a member of the media, it unfortunately includes the media. And I think when you think about what inspired you to take action on climate and on environment, and thinking about how to communicate with others, perhaps in ways that might reach them, that something like New York Times op-eds or speeches might not inspire them. And I think that goes beyond just looking to taking a hike or some of the more traditional things we think about the conservation movement, but also learning about where the pollution is coming from in where you live and who it's affecting, because we know that it's affecting communities of color disproportionately, just as the COVID crisis has. And I think the more knowledge we have of how how the effects of climate won't be felt easily, I think that kind of information can really empower people to do more.
Wow, that's a great intro to Rabbi Cardin's work. I want to bring her in here now to talk a little bit about your experience. And you're a spiritual leader and an activist. You've been involved in politics for a long time. You're involved at the state level. How has, what have you learned that can help us to be effective advocates with Congress?
Well, one of the things that I learned, which is what you're demonstrating tonight, is the religious community is organized. One of the things that's the hardest thing to do when you motivate people is figure out how do you corral them, how do you organize them. And the religious community is organized. It's got a great communication system, so you can get the message out. So first of all, just use the fact that we are already a pre-existing organized structure, which is great. The other thing is, while the faith community hasn't fallen as far in trust in the the public mind, we're not always as high as we would like to be. Nonetheless, and Congressman Levin could confirm this, but from what I see in Maryland, in our local legislators, the faith leaders, the faith representatives who go and speak to our legislators, say that faith leaders really make an impact. Faith leaders and the youth make a great impact on legislators. And we also have youth, in the faith community. So we're not seen as having an axe to grind. We really do, when we go in with full faith, seem to be serving a higher cause. And legislators hear that, right? It's not for our financial gain, and it's not because we have a particular dog in the fight. It's because we are moved from as it were, pure ideology and a vision of what a better world could be, and working for the other. So we should be honest to that. We should be faithful to that vision, and we should use that vision, and we should take the youth with us. And I think there's one other thing that we bring that others might also bring, but not always. That is, we don't just do environmentalism. We are environmentalists. It is who we are. That our belief in caring for the earth as a way of caring for each other is written into our DNA. So that when we speak about, the environment, we're not just speaking about, as it were, polar bears. People understand that now. When we speak about the environment, we're speaking about the entire ecosystem. We're speaking about the health of people. I think Rebecca's absolutely right, by the way. In this past year, people have awakened more than ever to the environmental injustice, to the disproportionate impacts that an environment has on certain communities because of policies that we have made, and that we have to right them, and that the social justice issues that motivated the American Jewish community and the faith community are turning now into also environmental justice issues. So people who you might not have been able to engage before in sustainability are now all of a sudden being engaged because it's about social justice. So that's one other way that the faith community, I think, is helping frame this issue.
Okay, I'm going to kick that to Congressman Levin in a minute to talk about environmental justice. But in the meantime, we're going to open the chat. So if people have questions, you can start putting them in there. We're obviously not going to have time for all of your questions, but we'll try to get to at least a few of them. Congressman Levin, environmental justice is obviously a tenet of faith for many of us. And it's been heartening to hear that President-elect Biden understands that we need to address the impacts of past and future policies on frontline communities and communities of color. But it seems unlikely that there'll be enough votes to pass, some of the really far-reaching bills like the Environmental Justice for All Act or similar legislation that we've been talking about over the past, year or so. How can we ensure that the voices of these communities are heard and taken seriously when every bill is considered in Congress?
Well, that's a great question. I guess I'll say two things. One is that I'm really proud of the people that President-elect Biden has named to the cabinet. Of course, we have to make sure that the nominations are confirmed as quickly as possible. But just as one example, my friend Deb Haaland as the new Secretary of the Interior. We served together on the House Natural Resources Committee, and she's a dear friend of mine, and she'll be an extraordinary advocate. And her historic nomination for Indian country in particular. She'll be an amazing advocate for the Native American community, but for environmental justice generally. And I think the same is true for Jennifer Granholm at DOE and the folks that have been nominated for the other agencies of jurisdiction, Mayor Pete at Transportation, et cetera. Now Secretary Pete, no longer Mayor Pete, now Secretary Pete. So the cabinet's really important, but you're right about the challenge with a 50 seat majority rather than a 60 seat majority. And it gets back to this concept of budget reconciliation, of what we can and cannot do with budget reconciliation. So I think it's important to just, if you'll entertain this for about 60 seconds briefly, to just explain what I think we can do with 50, and it'll apply to environmental justice and apply to a lot of other things. So with 50 votes with budget reconciliation, you get one shot at it a year, and it can relate to mandatory spending and the tax code. So you could do things like fees, rebates, and you can do a lot with fees and rebates. So you can't mandate things per se, but you can provide a rebate for good activity and a fee for a not so good activity. And that really, you could do a lot with that. Green bank is a concept. Carbon tax, I know my friends at Citizens Climate Lobby are interested in those sorts of bills. It is a very powerful tool. And I think there's a lot that can be done with, around environmental justice with regard to fees and rebates, and also things like electricity, energy transportation charges, where you charge less for clean energy than you would for fossil energy. So it's supposed to pay for itself. Any of these budget reconciliation bills are supposed to pay for themselves within a 10-year period. But look, this is how Trump got the tax cuts done in 2017. This is how Obamacare ultimately went, because we lost the 60 votes that we needed. We wound up with Scott Brown in Massachusetts, who had 59. So we had to do Obamacare via budget reconciliation. That's how George W. Bush did his tax cuts. I bring it all up because we can still do big, bold things around climate, around environmental justice, around clean transportation, around power generation, around agriculture, with budget reconciliation. So more to come. And just to let you know, they did call the next vote, so I'll have to go probably in about 10 minutes or so.
Okay, well, that's very important. We're not going to hold you back from that. I want to turn to Ms. Leber. What do you think about what the congressman just said? I know you are watching Congress like a hawk. I have learned myself as a grassroots activist that there are a lot of things besides legislation that happen in Congress and that we can weigh in on. But what do you think about using this methodology or other methods to get things through that can't be passed as legislation? Unmute yourself.
I'm sorry. Yeah, there's a couple tactics that I'll try to run through this briefly before the Congress has to go. I think, well, one that I don't think has been mentioned is the Congressional Review Act. And that will be a really important tool depending on how Democrats choose to use this. But basically that law allows Congress to overturn the most recent regulations that the previous president issued in the last 60 days of the session. So that applies to a number of Trump rules that restrict how science is used at the EPA and how it calculates costs and benefits. And it could possibly expand to rules that limit, weaker rules that he rolled back on methane. So there's a lot that can be done there. The problem with Congressional Review Act is how it competes for time with other important priorities like confirming appointees and passing legislation. So it's not a cure-all. And the other thing I'll mention actually isn't a congressional solution, but I think just as important, and that's executive action. How we'll see and how we will have to see a lot of movement, especially on environmental justice from the executive branch. And that's something that President Biden has promised to look at as a priority and to raise environmental justice concerns. But that needs to work alongside with more congressional solutions, because I think from my reporting, what I've heard universally from environmental justice advocates is we need more laws that protect people from pollution, but also from discrimination that leads to these polluting facilities to be sited in communities of color. So we need an approach on multiple levels.
Great, that's really helpful. Before the congressman has to go, I just would like to ask you, we've been getting a lot of questions about the potential for an infrastructure package to move in the first 100 days or maybe before that. I've read conflicting reports about that. I know that you in particular are championing legislation for clean transportation and zero emission vehicles, which possibly could be included in a transportation bill. Is that something we should be working on to push through? Is that our best chance to get climate legislation through?
I think it's a great chance. Yes, I do think that, the Biden-Harris administration has said that within the first 100 days, they want to do a big green infrastructure package to put millions of Americans back to work. And I think, yes, I think that's where time and attention will be. Once we get this, the next 8 days out of the way, and we move forward with a peaceful transition to the Biden-Harris administration. I think Rebecca was spot on with discussion of the Congressional Review Act as well. And just when I thought I've seen the worst of the Trump environmental and energy regulations, it gets worse seemingly every day. I don't think there's ever been, at least in modern American history, such an anti-environment, anti-science administration. And we've seen just the gutting of decades of bipartisan progress on environmental protection. People forget that Richard Nixon was president when the EPA was created, and George H.W. Bush when the Clean Air Act was amended, and was Republicans and Democrats alike working on a lot of these things until I think a handful of years ago when the Citizens United decision came about. Campaign finance got really out of hand, continues to be really out of hand, and all of a sudden the oil and coal companies decided that rather than investing in research, they could invest in politicians and basically just buy federal elections and then get these people to do what they wanted. And that's been an effective strategy. I hate to say that, but that's exactly what has happened. So I bring all that up because Congressional Review Act does give us a window to try to do something to unwind some of the more egregious recent executive actions. And I know that Jonathan, who's on this Zoom from my team, has done a close look at a lot of this. And we had even a piece of legislation to try to unwind it all in one fell swoop that we've been working on and discussing with the Biden-Harris administration. But make no mistake, it's all systems go come January 20 with regard to big green infrastructure bill, and then using the Congressional Review Act and using budget reconciliation to whatever extent we can. And we are going to have to get through Joe Manchin of West Virginia, Senator Manchin. West Virginia, as you know, still likes coal. And I think we need to move on from coal towards cleaner sources of energy. And so he's going to be now the impediment. Mitch McConnell was the impediment. Now it's Joe Manchin. I'd rather have Joe Manchin as the impediment than Mitch McConnell. All our ideas went to die in the McConnell graveyard previously. So we'll work with Senator Manchin. We'll get a lot of things done. We'll put millions of Americans back to work, and we're going to dramatically reduce our greenhouse gas emissions with your help.
You gave us a great reminder that we have to work on democracy along with climate change, that the two go together. One is not going to work without the other. Before you go, I just have to ask you my one personal question. Can you tell us about a time when citizen activists like us, grassroots activists, have made a difference in what you have done in your work in Congress?
Well, you make a difference in what I do every day. We compile all of the correspondence that we get on all the different topics that we get. I personally see a ton of it. I respond myself to a ton of it, and our team responds to all of it. And I can tell you that it matters. It really matters. And grassroots activism, I think, still is the most powerful political tool that we have at our disposal. I've been asked, why is it that we lost some of those seats in the House? And I would say, from my vantage point, one of the biggest reasons is we were not able to go door to door. We're not able to speak person to person about the issues that mattered, because we wanted to keep people safe and healthy during the pandemic. But your citizen participation, your grassroots activism makes all the difference in the world. We cannot do our jobs effectively unless we're listening to everyday people who are concerned about their communities. So keep up your work, redouble your work. And for those who are in my district, in San Diego and in Orange counties, come see me, talk to me. You probably have my cell phone number, but I'm grateful to you all, and very, very thankful to be with you tonight, and say a little prayer for all of us here in the Capitol these coming days and weeks as we try to transition to a new administration and try to get things done for the people.
Thank you so much for being with us tonight. Now you go and vote, and I'm going to turn to Ms. Leber. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you. Take care.
Ms. Leber, before we leave you, I just want to ask you, after everything that you've heard, what do you think? This was a question that came in from our audience of over 200 people. I just want to point out. What do you think should be our priority as activists in terms of getting something done on climate in that first 100 days?
Yeah, wow. So I think, I mean, it's been underscored a lot, and things like kind of the older fashioned tactics of writing to your congressman or congresswoman, calling, those work. And when we have a future where it's possible to visit in person, those kinds of tactics, it lets them know that they have constituency that cares. As far as what should be the priorities, well, I think like what's clear in this conversation is Democrats have to really hit the ground running. This is going to be a multi-pronged approach where we'll have to see Trump rules repealed. We will have to see a whole administration confirmed. And Congress at the same time has to address a terrible economic crisis, a COVID crisis, and also push forward on climate. So that's a lot. I think in the early days, some of the priorities that will be a big focus, and I think opportunities for climate to be a big part of that discussion is a relief and stimulus package. Now that Congress will probably be taking another look at this. We saw in the surprisingly bipartisan package just passed at the end of the year, we saw a lot of agreement on climate change and in providing more funding for infrastructure, providing more money for research in various climate solutions, and addressing a few long needed budget gaps when it comes to environmental priorities. So that when we see another round of those stimulus talks, I think is where we're going to see a ton of opportunity around basically like a Green New Deal stimulus that both rescues our economy, but also positions us to a lower carbon future. And I think what you see within that are priorities that look at electrifying buildings, which are a huge source of our carbon emissions, cleaning up our electricity sector, and cleaning up our cars. Those, I think, are three major planks that we will see Democrats have to move on, and were big planks of President Biden's platform. I'm sure there's a lot I'm missing here, but I think that stimulus package will be a big focus. I think moving out, we talked about other priorities, environmental justice, and possibly there's been talk of a national clean energy standard, which would be a first, but sets an actual floor for states to reach where we, because right now it's been state by state, there's been very little kind of cohesion here, and a national clean energy standard could be a game changer in raising the bar for our climate action. So I think there's a huge suite of policies that you could kind of take what interests you, but looking at how this will fit into and intersect with all of these other priorities that Democrats will be moving forward. Because I think when you look at climate solutions, they often do intersect with priorities like boosting democracy, like improving turnout for voters, and COVID relief. I think there's a lot of opportunity where these all intersect.
Right. You've given us a lot to think about. I want to just reinforce that stay with the basics. I think you're telling us right now the eyes of the country are going to be on the stimulus, on the recovery from COVID, and we need to keep our eye on the prize with that. I think you also hit on the idea that we really need those national standards. We need movement in Congress, and that's why we have to stay focused. Now I'm going to call on Rabbi Cardin. You can respond to what you've heard. You can sum up, give us our spiritual charge, and after Rabbi Cardin speaks, we're going to hear from Phil Arignanu from Dayenu, who's going to talk to us about action steps that we can take tonight, and how we can also access information from all of our sponsoring organizations to stay involved over the coming months. So let me turn it over to Rabbi Cardin.
Thank you. And thank you, Rebecca, for that extraordinary array of tasks that we can engage in. Sometimes it's overwhelming. So a couple of things, our tradition says, lo alecha hamalacha ligmor, it's not up to us to finish the job, but we have to get engaged. So just choose the issue that most excites you, what you're most passionate about, that you feel you have the most capacity to handle, and engage in that. And as many of us, I think, sometimes get frustrated, our own representatives might already be supportive of the positions that we want to legislate for, advocate for. They need to hear from us anyway. I went to a church and I was speaking to a group of people who were very much environmentalists. And I stopped and I said, I'm preaching to the choir. And the pastor said, well, even the choir needs rehearsal sometimes. We really have to continue to buoy up the people who are even our supporters. But then it's also great to work with organizations like the sponsors here, because they will help us multiply our voices. So get engaged with them as well. And one other thing, just talk about it with your family and your friends and your coworkers. Just talk about it. It's okay for you to be known as the green person, the person who always talks about these environmental and sustainability issues. But if people don't talk about something, if people don't hear that something is being talked about a lot, it sometimes falls off the radar. We have to make sure that climate is a priority, along with the critical issues, obviously, of democracy and the stimulus package and handling COVID and these crises. But you can't handle those crises without taking care of climate as well. Just make sure you talk about it and make sure that it's elevated to a high level of priority concern among your community, because that in and of itself heightens the urgency and helps get things done. So just one more juicy spiritual text that I want to leave you with. Again, from Isaiah. The end of Isaiah is a fabulous book. You should definitely all go read it. And then a commentary from the Zohar. Isaiah, chapter 51, talks about God and us and creation. And it says, I've placed my words in your mouth. That is God's words, God's Torah, right? The teachings of God, the wisdom of God. I've placed them in your mouth. We own these. And in the shade of my hand have I sheltered you, and you are protected by me. To plant the skies and make firm the earth, right? Why have we gotten this wisdom? Why have we been protected by God? So that we can help plant the skies and make firm the earth, and say to Zion, God says, Ami ata, you are my people. And the Zohar, right, the Kabbalistic mystical book says, no, don't read Ami, saying you are my people. Right? I didn't do all this and give this to you so that you would be my people. That's not it. Don't read Ami. Rather read Imi, with me, for you are a partner in the ongoing act of creation. I did all this. I gave you this wisdom. I sheltered you so that I could make and plant in the skies, and I can make firm the earth. No. So that you can help me. Imagine the vision of planting the skies. What does that mean? It's a fabulous vision. We have to unpack that. We plant the skies, we make firm the earth, because we are partners in God's ongoing creation. That is our task. That's what keeps us going amidst all the frustrations we have and the setbacks and the hard work and the long nights with Muriel and everybody else who've been working so hard. I'm sure that's what keeps us going. That we are God's we are God's partners in this awesome divine creation. So now that you've heard so much about what we have to do and how we can get it done and how we should be involved as Jews, we turn to Phil Can't even pronounce your first name, much less your last name. Phil, I'm going to let you pronounce your last name because if I can't do Phil right, I'm not going to be able to do your last name. So Phil, the Chief Strategy Officer at Dayenu, a Jewish call to climate action, who will explain how each of us can take action now before leaving tonight. Phil.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Cardin. It's great to be here. I'm Phil Arignano, and I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Dayenu, Jewish Call to Climate Action. Thank you to Representative Levin for being here. Thank you for Mirla for hosting, and thank you for Rebecca for that really fascinating and timely discussion. And thanks to everybody here for your great questions. There were so many more than we could answer today, but we're excited to get to work together. As our speakers have made clear, this is such a crucial moment for the climate action. We literally have no time to waste. And we need solutions that actually address inequities for those who are most at risk. First, Black, Brown, Indigenous people, low-income folks, young people, we're all going to be affected by climate change. Many of us have already been impacted, but we really need to center the folks who are being impacted currently. So the first thing to do is to add your name to a call to action. Really easy, you've all done this before. Dayenu, Interfaith Power and Light have detailed actions, sets of priorities we want the Biden administration and members of Congress to pursue in the first 100 days. And we'll have a link for you to check those out. The Jewish Earth Alliance has been leading the charge in connecting with members of Congress across the country and advocating, and is currently advocating for 100% zero emissions vehicles, as Rebecca said, one of the major pieces that we need to address. And our friends at Chazon are advocating for a climate smart food policy in the next administration. So check out those actions. We've compiled a list of action alerts. You know, adding your name to a call is just the start. In order to move towards a 100% clean energy economy and build a just and equitable country for all, for generations to come, we'll need to do much, much more. Once the COVID threat has passed, we'll need to get out in the streets. And even before that, we'll need to meet with our members of Congress. We'll need to talk to our friends. It's time to make our voices and the voices of the Jewish community heard. Add your name, sign up for one or more of our organizations, stay in touch, and continue to take action throughout the 117th Congress. So with that, I want to thank you all for joining us. We're going to close out the evening with a little bit of music and some slides, so you're welcome to stick around. I want to wish everybody a Laila Tov, good night, and we will see you next time.